What's up, YouTube? Welcome to Bible Wisdom. Today is the segment A Jesus Marriage. I'm recommending listening to the book The Marriage You've Always Wanted by Gary Chapman. And I'm going to be talking about a few points from that book. I will try to put the link to that book in the description of this video so you can get that book, and there's no affiliate for me or anything like that, so it's just a link to where you can know to get that book. And so one thing that I wanted to share with you is that we cannot judge our spouse. You know, there's a lot of good points in that book, and we cannot always be trying to get the plank out of our spouse's eye, saying, oh, they always do this wrong, they always do that wrong, they're always doing something wrong. And one of the things that Gary Chapman said is that he made a list about what he asked his clients to make a list about what they think their spouse does wrong. And so the list was super long, and so then he asked the same people to make a list about what they think their own selves do wrong, like themselves, and they couldn't think of anything, So what he was saying is, like, it's so easy to think, all this is what my spouse is doing wrong, they're doing this, and this wrong. But when you think about what you're doing wrong, you can hardly think of anything, because we're not very critical of ourselves sometimes. Sometimes in certain cases, depending on how we're thinking, we're more thinking about what that other person is doing wrong. And so one tip that he gave was that you can't try to always change your spouse. Of course, if it is a vital issue, bringing that up in a way that is not highly critical of your spouse. And he gave points about how to do that. And I guess I can talk about that right now. Well, he brought up 2 Corinthians 13. I think it's 2 Corinthians, but it's about chapter 13 about love. And in that Bible verse, God is talking about how love is all these different things. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it doesn't boast. And so he's saying how he also mentioned how love edifies. And what does edify mean? Edify means love builds up someone else, And so we can't always be criticizing of our spouse and expecting that criticism to change them or to produce the outcome that we're looking for. And so one example he gave was that his wife, Gary Chapman, him and his wife, he said his wife would always leave the drawers in the kitchen or in the house open, wherever there was a drawer. I mean, she would sometimes close them, but a lot of times, for whatever reason, his wife would leave the drawers open. And so he mentioned it to his wife, a few times. And he's like, hey, when you leave the drawers open, and you don't close them after you use them, that irritates me, And so after a while, he noticed that his wife was not getting his message. She wasn't able to change, and so he was mentioning how sometimes, it doesn't have to necessarily be a huge moral issue, but sometimes your spouse may be unable to change, or unwilling, or just they can't. And so he was left with options. He's like, well, what am I going to do in this situation? Am I going to stay angry? Am I going to leave my spouse? Am I going to, always be angry for the rest of my life that my spouse does not forgets sometimes to close the drawers? And so he decided to make up his mind that he would not be irritated with his spouse and how they do not close the drawers. So he ended up telling his wife, he's like, hey honey, you know about the drawers? And then she interrupted. She's like, oh, not again. Don't get on me about the drawers. And he's like, no, just listen. And he's like, from now on, I'm not going to get irritated about the drawers, and, I am not, it's not going to be a big deal anymore. And so from that point on, he said how he has never gotten irritated when his wife does not close the drawers anymore. And so, what's the lesson in that? The lesson is that, there's some things that there might be always something wrong with your spouse. Not necessarily like there's literally something wrong, but there's always something that can irritate you about your spouse. And it might not necessarily be a big deal. Like it might be something like, how they leave the towels, or how they leave hair in the sink, or, whatever it may be. There's always something that can irritate you about another person. And so, he was saying how for those situations, you have to realize how you're treating your spouse, how you're communicating your criticisms, and how you are conveying your dislike about something, because you want to edify that person. Meaning, again, edify means to build that person up. And so he gave a great example saying how to do that. So for example, if you feel like you need to criticize your spouse about something, maybe you feel like they did something wrong and it's not something that you can just let go, and so you want to bring it up. And so he said a great example would be to say, hey honey, I think that are you ready to hear a bit of criticism? And so you start off by asking them, hey, can I give you some constructive criticism? And so from that point, they can either say, no, I don't want to hear it, or, maybe not right now, but maybe later, or whatever the case may be. And so when your spouse finally says, hey, I'm willing to listen, you say, okay, well, I really noticed how, you take out the trash really well. And I wanted to just tell you that, I think that you're taking out the trash well, and thank you for that. And so basically he said to try to start off with compliments. You say, oh, and on top of that, I like how you wash the car really well. You always keep the car very clean. That's something that you do well. And then he's like, oh, and I like how you don't leave your clothes everywhere. I think you always clean up the clothes very well, and I'm so glad that you do that. And so then he said, then at the end of, after you've given a few compliments about what your spouse does right, you say, oh, okay, and I wanted to tell you that I think that when you leave your hairs in the sink and after you've done shaving, that I feel like if you can you please clean those up after you've after you've shaved, because it really irritates me that you leave your hairs in the sink. And so that's just an example to say that, you know, then your spouse won't feel like a failure because you have given them compliments, you've reminded them of why you value them, but also you've told them what is irritating you. And so you have to, he didn't necessarily give a reason of kind of deciphering between whether it's an issue to let it go or is it an issue to bring up. And another great example that he gave is that instead of giving into your anger when you feel irritated at your spouse, you know, being able to realize, you know, ways to get your point across without succumbing to anger. And so one example that he gave was saying, like, you know, allowing 2 to 3 minutes for when you and your spouse have something that you need to talk about and you're both kind of maybe angry or irritated, you know, allowing 2 to 3 minutes for each spouse without interrupting each other to share their point. So the husband will say, you know, 2 to 3 minutes of what he feels like his opinion is about a certain issue. And then the wife is not allowed to interrupt. And then the wife is given 2 to 3 minutes to speak about what they feel is their opinion on the issue. And the husband is not allowed to interrupt. And basically using that space where you're not interrupting each other is a way to get your point across and subdue the anger that you feel. So I wanted to give those 2 examples, and I hope they're helpful. You know, that he was bringing a point across that I totally agree with, is that we have to accept our spouse, you know, and it's easy to think that, oh, you know, because of this issue, you know, I married the wrong person, you know, and that's not true. You know, that's not true. That you need to be able to love. And he brought up a great scripture about how it says, husbands, love your wives. And he also said a scripture from Titus about older women teach the younger women to love their husbands. And so I thought it was a great point that when you're in a relationship with someone, you know, it's always easy to look at the faults of that person. And, you know, you even still, after you know this, after you've seen this video, you still could be irritated about something that your spouse does. But the way that you convey, you know, that problem to your spouse is very critical. And some things you don't always need to bring up. There's some things that you need to be able to just let go and accept, like the example that I gave about when the example that I gave earlier about the hairs in the sink, or you know, the drawers being left open. There's some things that you need to be able to choose that, you know, hey, my spouse it's just some imperfection that they might have, as well as you might have some imperfection that you might have, and you need to be able to accept that about your spouse instead of having this highly critical spirit about you where you're not willing to accept something that your spouse either can't change or is unable to change. You know, I guess that's the same phrase, but unwilling to change or cannot change, you know. And so I think that was pretty much all that I wanted to share. You know, it's just remembering that we need to be able to love our spouse and not be highly critical. And then when you do need to share a criticism, you know, you need to remember that love edifies, you know, love builds that person up. And so I highly recommend The Marriage That You've Always Wanted by Gary Chapman. And I will leave that link in the description. And I hope you got something from this video. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you on the next video. See ya.